Okay.
And hang on. Just waiting for confirmation.
All right. It says we're now streaming live on YouTube. You confirm that?
Just a second. Yep, you're good.
Wonderful.
Want to switch computers?
No, how do you do it?
I have to get on the other computer.
Before I call this meeting to order, let me make a quick check of everyone we have, make sure there's not a minute more to be done. Also, to give another minute for people who are having technical difficulty out there in the real world to join us and watch. David Imes, I commend you on your background.
Thank you, Ben.
Tammy's there. 2, 3, 6. We're seemingly missing George, and I've gotten no notification that I can find. Anyone else have any idea?
Go get the phone list and call him if you want,
Yeah,
Ben.
right. I could do that, but we've done the cursory 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and start, unless anyone else has any objections at the moment.
So where did you come back?
She's not here.
Okay, everyone, if you could please ensure you have mute going and then use your space bar to unmute when you want to talk. That way we mitigate the background noise. And we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ben Sale, the chair of the Annapolis Planning Commission for our second virtual public meeting on June 4th, 2020. We're starting, it's about 7:05 Eastern Time. And we'd like to start off with a roll call by Ms. Tammy Hook. Tammy, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Sale,
Here.
Mr. Waldman,
Present.
Mr. Harold,
Here.
Mr. Pline,
Here.
Ms. Butler,
Here.
Mr. Imes,
Here.
and Mr. Matthews. I'm done.
Okay, looks like we have a quorum and we are missing Mr. Matthews. Hopefully he will dial in. If he does, and I don't notice that, please someone make a note that he's joined, or hopefully he will make the note himself. We'll move on now to the approval of minutes, and starting with the March 5th, and then we'll move on to May 7th. So March 5th, everyone take about 30 seconds or so to look at that. If you have any comments, please pipe up in about 30 seconds.
I will move approval.
I will second.
Are there any comments with the motion? Okay, we have a first and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The minutes pass. Moving on to the minutes from May. Please review those for the next 30 seconds and make comment at the end of that if you have any.
I will move approval.
There's been a motion for approval. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Any comments? All those in favor of passing the May 7th minutes, say aye.
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 Aye. Any oppositions? Any abstentions? The May 7th meeting minutes have passed. I'll move on to section D of our public meeting, public hearings. But
I'm
before
sorry
we-
to backpedal, but Diane had a change and I didn't send the change out. But you guys were all on the email. Did you guys see the change on the email? Or would you prefer I read it? I just wanted to make sure because I didn't send the revised minutes out.
To be
I
clear,
can't find it.
to be clear, could you read it real
I
quick?
take my,
Let's go ahead and read it.
Okay, let's see. It said, commissioners asked questions, including how long maintenance of roads were handled, and why some road improvements were contained in the CIP budget rather than in the PAYGO system, and or other mechanisms the city has for managing its infrastructure maintenance liabilities. We were advised that it is not for the planning commission to look at the financial aspects of the CIP budgets. So I make sure that that was in the record. I didn't send out the revised minutes.
And since we just passed the minutes as published, which did not have that in it,
Right.
do we have a motion on the floor to include that into the minutes as an amendment?
Well, because I made the motion, I will move to include those additional comments.
I'll second that.
Do we have any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? The amendment to the meetings for May 7th have passed. Tammy, please record that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, before we move into the public hearings portion of our meeting, in case there's anyone from the public who is not here for our last meeting, I will also reiterate what was said last week and the fact that public comment is able to be had prior to a meeting when the agenda has been posted through email and a special form to the Planning and Zoning Department, which can be found on the Planning and Zoning Department's website. Also, that public comment can be made after our meeting for our public hearing items, unless there is some circumstance where we can't hold it open. We will hold open the public hearing items till our next meeting. So anything that we talk about in public hearing tonight, the public can digest that, watch the YouTube video again if they want, and send in public comment to the Planning and Zoning Department, who will then forward it to all of us commissioners. We have already received some public comment via email for tonight's meeting, and we all have that. So if any one of the public wants to make comment, feel free after we have this meeting to send it in via email. Instructions are on the Planning and Zoning website. With that said, are there any other comments from the commissioners, any additions you'd like to add?
Man, for just a,
I see Mr. Hildebrand would like to add.
Yes.
So go
Hi.
ahead.
Diane, have you logged on twice? I see a second Diane Butler in the attendees.
well, I was gonna switch to another computer because it looked like this was really choppy, but
Yeah.
is it okay? Because if it's fine, I'll just stay here.
No, it doesn't matter. Just whatever you want to do. I just wanted to be sure it's you and not someone else.
No, it's me. I was going to my husband's laptop, which is better.
Okay.
I'll let it go.
And Diane, this was the same issue as the last meeting. We can hear you fine, but the visual is a little choppy, but it is a nice background. So if you'd like to change computers, feel free to do that at any time. That'll help resolve issues. Thank you.
Okay, great. I might just go ahead and switch.
Go right ahead, as far as I'm concerned. And the public hearings we'll move into here, well, the first one we'll be hearing is O TAC 18, TAC 20, the Institutions for the Care of the Aged. So I'll leave that over to Planning and Zoning to begin that. And let's open the public hearing.
Would you like me to give a little presentation first, Ben?
I'm expecting that. Should I not be expecting that?
No, that's just before the public hearing.
You're right. I went a little early there with that. Sorry.
No
Thank
big
you.
deal. Okay, good evening. Sally Nash, Department of Planning and Zoning. I'm here tonight to present ordinance O-1820. Alderman Savage, who is the sponsor of this ordinance, has joined us. This ordinance is pretty straightforward. It's adding a use to a zoning district, the PM2 zoning district, which is a professional mixed office park district. It's a district very similar to our other business districts. It's fairly restricted in terms of the uses that are allowed there. It only occurs in 2 places in the city. The maps are included in the staff report. One of them is in Ward 3, where the Safeway is, and one is in Ward 7, which is across from the Giant. The genesis of this ordinance is that the Bay Village continuing care or retirements and nurse, I don't know if it's a nursing home or Rob can help fill in the details, but they are building some nursing care facilities now, and they would like to expand. The parcel next to them is zone PM2, so they need this zoning change in order to do that, which explains some of the public comments you received, the traffic study information, and the information about quantum sales, which really will have more to do with the application for this institution, this particular institution for the care of the aged that wants to come into the city. But first they need the zoning change. So some of the public comments spoke to that. And so all in all, you should have received 5 pieces of letters and information from the public, including from John Arison. So like I said, PM2 allows, generally offices, some limited retail. This won't be a big change to the PM2. Institutions for the care of the aged, I would say, are generally not allowed in business districts, or there's some business districts like BCE, they are permitted, or business corridor enhancement. There's other places like P and C2P, which is conservation professional office and professional office, where they are allowed as special exceptions. So this is a little bit different than how we treat institutions for the care of the aged in our office and mixed use districts. Traditionally, they've been considered more of a residential use, and they are allowed as permitted uses in all of our residential districts, except for C1A, Special Conservation Residence District. That being said, this is a really low impact use. Some of the public comment speaks to the low traffic impact of this type of use. And so it's given the very limited nature of the zoning as far as geography, given the limited nature of the impact of this particular use, we don't object to the legislation. And so that concludes my remarks. Thank you. Any questions for me?
Sally?
Yes.
I have 3 questions. The first question has to do with what consequences there may be to the Safeway parcel. I'm not familiar with it. Is it large enough for something like this? What could it be suited for if this text amendment is passed?
You mean if the Safeway were to close?
Well, there's a parcel apparently behind the Safeway. Is that what's also, which is not currently being used? It's a parking lot.
It's an outlot in the parking lot.
I'm sorry?
It's an outlot in the parking lot.
It's Safeway? Oh, yeah, I don't think that lot is big enough for this use.
Okay.
So,
I have some questions for Sally, but I'll wait until the conclusion of the public hearing to go into that.
All right. So just to summarize with respect to my first question, which is there would be essentially no consequences to the Safeway area.
okay, let me amend that comment. We have changed the bulk regulations, so they're determined through site design. So I guess it is theoretically possible that a very small institution for the care of the aged could go on that site, but it's not a very big site. So I wouldn't anticipate that.
Okay. The second question is that you made a comment in your staff report that you would like to ultimately merge this particular zone with some other zone in your continuing quest to simplify our zoning maps.
Right.
What zones are you thinking of that might merge, that you might merge PM2 into?
So PM2 is one of our transitional zones. We have some pretty straightforward business zones. We have some pretty straightforward residential zones, and then we have an assortment of these transitional zones. But I would like to probably combine it with some of the other transitional zones where the uses are very similar. I was thinking we could probably combine it with P, which is professional office, and PM, which is professional mixed. They're very similar. They don't occur in very many places in the city. A little bit of West Annapolis, a little bit on Forest, other places on Forest Drive. P occurs a little bit downtown, but not very much. So, you know, they're pretty similar transitional districts. And so I think those, just off, you know, the top of my head, it would make sense to combine them with one another.
Are the the factors to be considered similar in PM2, P, and PM? In terms of, I'm most interested in the relationship to surrounding areas, which could be residential. So are the setback and design guidelines pretty much parallel?
Yes, they are. Most of the bulk regs are all determined through, for this kind of use, are determined through site design. So it would be the same for most of the uses. They're pretty similar. The main difference is the mix of uses. Some of them are a little bit more businessy on the spectrum of business to residential, and some of them are a little bit more residentially on that spectrum. So that's kind of the difference, but they're all these transitional zones, which are meant to kind of buffer the more pure residential from the more pure business districts.
Okay. The third question, I guess it sounds like you've already answered, which is if such an application comes before, would such an application come before us? Either as a major site design or maybe as a planned development even, but would it come before us in any case for review?
If it was a major site design or a planned development, yes.
Okay, and if such a thing as this enlargement of a senior's home, would that be considered a major site design?
Yes.
It would conform to existing zoning if this were to be approved, and it would sail right through. There would be no other review.
Well, wouldn't we have purview not as to uses, but as to design aspects?
No.
Why not?
Conforms to existing zoning.
Well, I mean, Bill, it would, if it was a major site design, it would come to you for a review though. As all major site designs do now.
And anything this large would automatically qualify as a major site design?
Well, I don't know what they're proposing because they don't, you know, it doesn't, I haven't seen it yet, but I imagine that it would be big enough to trigger a major site design.
Can we get real quick the definitions that were put in the legislation? I know that's kind of off the cuff, but the definitions that pass with the legislations to make it a major site design that would come to the planning commission.
Sure.
We don't have that right now. We might want to get back to that in a few minutes, right? Would that help, Bill and Bob, if we had those to know?
Yes.
But that simply puts the planning commission in the position of critiquing the site design. It does not put us in position of approving or disapproving the use. And that's, I think, the essential difficulty of this situation.
Right. If this ordinance were to pass, it would be a permitted use. So it would be a question of what it looked like, basically. So
And that's a dangerous thing.
well, that now's your chance to decide if you don't think this use is appropriate for the zoning district.
Correct.
Right.
Well,
So,
they-
I mean,
You'll also have to the next meeting too, to think about it, since it'll still be open.
Well, the issue, from what I understand, is this kind of another shortcut that we're taking again, like we did before when people came to us for last minute zoning changes instead of going for a special exception? I mean, I'm getting a little tired of things coming to us last minute that has to be done now. So change the whole zoning so it works. for
No,
us.
it,
I
this
want to make
use
sure we're
is
not
not-
going down that path again.
this use is not allowed at all in the zoning district, so they do not have an option to apply for a special exception. It is one of those things that we don't really like to do where we have legislation for a very specific project where someone wants to do something, and so we have to change the code to let them do that. That's symptomatic of a larger issue, which is that our code needs major revisions, and
Mhm.
our table of uses is way too complicated, and we have way too many zoning districts. But I think you've heard me say that before.
I'm just a
But
little,
that's a symptom of a larger problem. That's not necessarily the fault of this particular application.
I'm just a little concerned about that area because there is, and I'm sure Alderman Savage will talk to this later. There is an issue with egress and ingress in that area right now, especially, I don't know if it's because of the COVID situation or not, but with the Starbucks where it is, you can't go to CVS without waiting a long time in line because they're using that whole pathway into it. I don't know if it's going to be affected by this or not, but anything more there, the Starbucks, the way it's planned is not, it's failing right there. And I don't know if that'll get better once people get back to work or not, and people are not all going to, but maybe it'll get worse actually. So I just want to be careful in that situation, in that area.
Right, so you have to consider whether this use in any of the areas where it would be allowed, any of the 2 PM2 districts in the city, would this use be worse than the uses that are already allowed in this district? Or would it be inappropriate in some way than the other uses that are allowed in this zoning district? So if you look at the other uses that are allowed in those districts, it includes things like restaurants and supermarkets that could theoretically have a much higher impact on a piece of property than this
Absolutely.
particular use.
Okay.
I was curious about the Lidl that was supposed to go in right behind where Bay Woods is going. How does that play into this?
Well, Rob can speak to this too. We talked to the county, I don't know, 2 weeks ago about that, and it is pretty far along in the planning, but they've been kind of stalled out and have had various issues with their site plan. We have been bugging them for years about including the connection that was shown in the 2009 comprehensive plan. And I think they finally get it. The only issue is that it hopefully is not too late. There's also apparently a steep grade there, but the county seemed at least willing to push this issue to Lidl to include the connection from their property. So that would be something that we would hope to see, because it hopefully would make the issue David is speaking to, would give relief to that issue a little bit. People would be able to go a different route, but we'll see. I don't know if Rob has heard anything from the county he could add in.
Do we want to wait that with his presentation, or do you think it's more appropriate now, Alderman Savage?
I can touch on it either time. It's okay with me.
Okay, let's wait on that in a quick second. Before we let go of Sally and move into the other presentations, is there any background for the Ward 3 property at the end of Cherry Grove on Forest Drive for this, or is it really more the other property in this packet?
That's the Safeway in Ward 3. It's
I'm actually talking about across the street on the Cherry Grove side,
okay,
not really the Safeway. Across the street.
No, I mean, that building
building.
has recently been redeveloped and has had a pretty good amount of tenants, at least before COVID. It was doing pretty well getting tenants, and I think it's going to be a successful office building. I know.
Just
You
to
know.
refresh people's memory, that's the, what do they call it? The Innovation Center?
It was called the MAFE
The
building.
MAFE building, the insurance MAFE.
Right, right. And I just want to make sure that that property wasn't really pushing this, you know? Okay,
No.
thank you. Any other questions for Sally?
I have one, Sally, one quick question. I know that there was a traffic study that was included, and I want to make sure that, let's say we agree to rezone this, that doesn't mean we've also agreed to the merits of the traffic study.
No, they'd have to, I mean, they haven't applied for anything. They would have to come through the process, follow the process. And I note in there that, or actually even the traffic engineer that did that study from Sabra noted that they would not be eligible to do the required traffic study that the city requires. So it would have to be a completely new study.
Thank you.
Okay, does this conclude the staff presentation before we go into public comment? Or is there more that's part of the staff presentation section before we go into public comment?
I'm good.
Well, then we will move into the public comment section. And to note, we will keep that open. We will not close it. However, we do have a presentation during this public comment, and we would like to get additional interaction and comment from the chairs after that. And I believe that's appropriate while the public comment is still open. And then when we're done with the meeting today, we keep the public comment section open and come back and then look at the new documents we may have received and then talk about it again. So it's almost like we're doing our commissioner summaries and talks about these items twice. Does anybody have any issue with that procedure that we're about to do? Okay, well then we'll move on to the public comments section. We'll open that up. Let's proceed. Let's start off.
Is Alderman Savage here to make comment?
Yeah, before since he didn't start, I figured I'd start for it. We've received some emails and all of you should have received those. There was a traffic study involved. There was some comments for support. And hopefully you can pick those up. If you don't have them with you right now, please open up your email inboxes and please review those and have them in your hand while this is going on. And we're going to move on then to Mr. Savage's comments.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the commission. So what I want to accomplish tonight is basically just explaining my rationale for introducing this. I think you all know my history with development, and I'm very, hesitant and cautious with that. And so I have given this quite a bit of consideration before introducing this. Based on a lot of communication with staff and the community. And so just in terms of background with the site, just to add some things that Dr. Nash has mentioned. And so this lot, the primary lot, which has a large tree on it, that was supposed to be a restaurant originally. That was the original conception. That was to be part of the development of the CVS, the overall Bay Village site. And so the tree is still there, but the lot's cleared now, and they did not have much luck getting a restaurant to come in there. And so in came this proposal from a different developer about putting in this assisted independent living facility that would be kind of a sister facility to the one behind the CVS, and which is that's the assisted living facility, if I'm not mistaken. And so the whole so in terms of the developer has met with some portion of the community. They met with the Annapolis Neck Peninsula Federation, myself, and over a number of meetings, as well as had some conversations with some city representatives. And so I again decided to introduce this after a lot of deliberation for a number of reasons. One of it, which I was originally holding out for the restaurant, as I think a number of folks who live down here would prefer a restaurant. I'll be quite frank with that. But as you could probably guess or imagine, I hear quite a number of concerns about traffic on this part of the neck. And so it really came down to, well, do people want a restaurant, or do we want to have something that's going to potentially have less impact on traffic? And so once I had a chance to actually look at the preliminary traffic study that was submitted, that seemed to indicate that this type of independent living facility would indeed have less impact on traffic. And so again, that's from, if people are going to, people have used traffic to try to halt development, myself included, on this neck. So if we're serious about that concern, then I thought it was prudent to support something that's going to have less of a traffic impact. And so again, it has synergy with the adjacent lots in the sense that it, again, the sister facility with the other senior facility that's there, but also touching on the Lidl question, the developer has committed to put in that Bay Village Drive, which would go behind the CVS and behind the Starbucks. The original idea was to have that connect with Georgetown Road and Edgewood Road, and as a kind of an internal street there where pedestrians could more easily walk around there to make a little bit of a community feel. And that was in, I believe, our comp plan, the current comp plan. And Dr. Nash, please correct me if I'm wrong. And so that's why behind these lots, there is that roadway is currently there. It's kind of a vacant parking lot that doesn't have final paving on it. And so, but it does stop right at the corner of right at the edge of the proposed Lidl property. And so, when I speak to the Lidl about this secondary roadway, they would point their fingers to this lot with the big tree and say, well, look, this developer, they don't want to put in the road, so we're not going to put it in if they're not going to do it. But we did also talk to this developer for the senior facility, and they have agreed to put in this roadway, and they also have agreed to adjust the grade to make it more easily for the Lidl folks to put it in on their facility. And so that's why, as Dr. Nash mentioned, we met with the county to speak to them about what they could do to talk to the Lidl about putting in this roadway, because it was important to me to based on my conversations with staff, to see if we could honor what was in the comprehensive plan, if we could. And so there's also the synergy with the lots in terms of the commercial services, which I think will be able to serve both the residential, the senior facilities that would possibly go in there. In terms of environmental issues, I don't have too many concerns because it's already cleared lot except for the large tree, which the initial proposals that I've seen, the developer wants to actually incorporate that tree and work that into the kind of aesthetics and philosophy of the complex itself, by having walking trails, seating areas around it for the residents. And so they also, along with this, are trying to purchase the Quantum Sail property, which is next door to the east, and to kind of, I guess, prevent them from having to go up quite so high, because one of their original proposals was, I think, 4 or 5 stories, which the community had some heartburn about that, and I think staff may have as well. And so they've scaled it back to 3 stories, and with some underground parking, I think is what last proposal I saw. So it also we're proposing to protect the forest in the rear. And so in terms of unintended consequences, that was another important factor of mine. And I did ask Dr. Nash that very question to make sure that it wasn't going to impact other areas in the city. So this is the first I heard about that little lot on the Safeway, but it sounds like that's not too much of a concern. But again, something else I've tried to emphasize with my constituents is this doesn't guarantee they can build this. They still have to go through the public process of going to this commission, having other public hearings, and they also have to do a full traffic study. You know, I don't even know what's going to happen with this or other development once Alderman Arnett and I work on the adjusting the traffic APF, because there is one movement in for this property that one of the intersections does have a movement that's failing, and that is something that we're going to have to work on at some point. But I did. The developer has agreed to provide some support for providing like a shuttle, essentially transit down Edgewood Road, which would be shared by the senior facilities that we have existing on Edgewood Road, because we currently don't have any transit that goes down that road. So I often hear from Bay Woods folks about wanting to get more transit. So that, I don't know if that fits in the planning commission, if it gets to that point, if you have an opportunity to look at transit and transportation. So that's basically it. They have, like I said, they did meet with some of the community members, and yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that I.
And Alderman Savage, thank you very much. And also, I'd like to, while we're talking, display a aerial map of the area, which might help in some of the conversation, if you don't mind. Any opposition to that? Okay, anyone else go ahead and ask questions? I'll go ahead and present that item.
I'm impressed, Mr. Savage. You've done a lot of homework on this. A lot of concerns that I might have had have really been addressed. But I find ourselves in a situation that I think Mr. Iams suggested, which is that here we are talking about a zoning text amendment, but what we're really talking about is a potential application. And so it's kind of putting, carts before horses. But I really do want to thank you. It's a lot of the issues which, if there is an application, these issues would arise under site design. And I look for, if there is an application, I look forward to addressing them there. But it's interesting that we find ourselves sort of caught, from both sides of the ravine here.
Yeah, and I think I perhaps I should have been more careful just to speak to the merits of the actual text amendment. And that's why I guess I was trying to at least mention about the use, restaurant versus this kind of a facility, and my kind of thinking about how I got to where I am today.
No, I think you did the right, for me, I think you did the right thing.
I have a quick
I need
question.
presenting capability. If you can give that to me pretty quick, sharing capability, please.
I also
Sorry, Dave.
appreciate what Mr. Savage is saying. I'm just concerned because this project in itself, as you actually mentioned, it does have a failing intersection, which I don't see how they're going to fix that, unless they have two different entrances from either side going into Starbucks. The one entrance is a mess, and we're gonna have cars on Bay Ridge Road who can't make the turn.
But that said, I mean, that's really a function of an application. It has nothing to do with
I understand.
this decision about use. And I do want to make sure that we're clear that we don't bring any potential issues involved within an application into this discussion on a particular use, because, I think if anything, what Alderman Savage has said and what the testimony that was supplied in writing says is that this potential use that this legislation is indicating is going to have less impact. So
I agree.
So we should just not go there, I guess is what I'm saying.
I agree. I'm just saying that we just need to be cautious as we go forward with this development, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm very much with David. To me, this reminded me uncomfortably of one of the all-time greatest disasters in the history of city planning in Annapolis, and that is the Eastport Shopping Center, which was somehow tucked under the rubric of conform to existing zoning, and it never came before the Planning Commission. It received minimal oversight from the department, and all of a sudden the citizens were, whoa, what happened here? And the horse was out of the barn before anybody knew it. And I want to make very sure that we don't make that mistake twice. Alex's point is a good one in a better atmosphere or in a better run atmosphere. But unfortunately, we have recent terrible experience with an almost identical situation where somebody got something declared consistent with current zoning, and then it was Katie bar the door. It never received so much as a how do you do. So we have to make very, very careful that if we were to approve the zoning change amendment, that the commitments that Alderman Savage just listed, the roadway, the tree, forest conservation at the rear, a transit service and so forth, that those are in writing as a condition of this approval. Because otherwise I don't have confidence that this will end up being a development that we could all be proud of.
Yeah, I have to say, I share your concerns because I knew there's other ones where we have the unintended consequences. I think 110 Compromise Street, what happened last night with the Board of Appeals, I'm very concerned about how that's going to affect the theater across the street. If you look into the real details of it, and that's in the middle of the Board of Appeals looking at it right now. There are things that we have to look at more closely or they could be disaster. And I'm just saying, we just need to be cautious is all.
Right.
And I just don't like us going through just changing zoning just for a particular development.
Right.
And I have a quick question about the urban low designation in our comprehensive plan. How does that mesh with the current zoning change that's being proposed? And why? And the other thing is, why are we calling it a text amendment? I thought it was just an ordinance to change the actual zoning there.
No, it changes the text. It does not change the map.
Right, it's not changing the map. It's just adding a use to the table of uses for this district.
Got it. And now I'm looking at page 28 of our comprehensive plan, and it shows that whole section across from the Giant as being urban center low. And there's a nice green buffer between the where the proposed road would be behind the Safeway, or behind the, CVS and Starbucks. And then, right, it's in between Old Annapolis Neck Road and, the backs of those stores. So that greenway space, that green buffer would still be preserved. I mean, I realize I'm going beyond just the zoning question. I just need to understand what the likely development that we'll see coming down the line will impact.
None of that is relevant for this text amendment. Those all have to do with specific applications, design guidelines.
I
It has
know.
nothing to do with the use. So let's just not go there, because we could be here all night talking
Well-
about what could be there in the future.
I
And-
know, but
Yeah,
I
well-
also, I saw SAYC, and I'm telling you, if we don't ask these questions now, we,
But that's not about a use.
no, well, it had to do with.
But if we
taking-
deny it, then we take that
Yes.
off the table.
Okay, well, I will withdraw the question for right now, but I'll just lodge some concern about losing all of that green buffer that now exists between Forest Drive and Old Annapolis Neck Road.
I have a question of Dr. Nash, which may answer at least partially your concerns. Dr. Nash, the Eastport Lofts came under the old process in which the Planning Commission did not see major site designs. Is that correct?
Correct.
And under the new process, let's say they tendered an application tomorrow, it would come before us. Is that correct?
Correct.
So one of the problems with the Eastport Lofts was because of the way things changed at the end of the Cohen administration, and it removed that purview from us, and it's been returned as of June 30th or 1st last summer, correct? I think that's when it was returned. So
At least, maybe longer. I don't know. I can't remember.
But the point being is that for those important years, Eastport Lofts, South Annapolis, and so forth, major site designs didn't come before the Planning Commission until it was returned to us. And that's that's a major reason why, as Bill says, the horse left the barn. And
Actually, it's much more than that, because I was involved with the Eastport Shopping Center and the B2 designation, and they were going to refile under B2, but then it became clear that they weren't at the last minute. So it had more to do with the negotiation and what was happening than just what you're talking about, Bob. But
okay, but
I don't know if it's that relevant.
In that this development is coming in under a very different process than the two contentious developments that were mentioned.
I agree. It's a different process, and I think we have more ability to review it and make our, concerns known. And I agree,
Yes.
It's a different process.
Thank you. Yes, I hope that helps to answer
Bob,
some concerns.
To the point, it could, as long as major site design gives us the opportunity to change the proposed density. Does major site design give us the opportunity to guarantee this roadway gets built, as Alderman Savage has promised us that it would be? Do we get to save the tree? Do we get forest conservation at the rear of the site? Do we get transit service? We didn't even get a bus stop at Eastport Shopping Center. I mean, we got hosed.
Dr. Nash. Dr. Nash, under site design review, would those questions arise?
Yes.
Okay.
How is this a shock to everyone? Look, and also, I mean, Bill, I think a lot of what you're saying is not quite accurate, but yes, under my major site design review, you will have a chance to review all of those issues.
Review or set them, prove them, redesign them, whatever.
You will have approval authority.
Okay, great. That's important.
Okay, Mr. Savage, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to chime in response to a few things I've heard. And I do think your concerns are very valid, and believe me, I would certainly hope that they're brought up later on in the review process to make sure that.
And Mr. Savage, if it helps your conversation at any time, I can bring up the aerial or the zoning map in a second, okay?
Okay. Yeah, and I think like some have mentioned, I think this is an appropriate conversation for the zoning application, but again, I do think it's important even to bring up now so people are aware. But I do think a good way to frame it as I'm listening to folks is that, in my mind, again, I'm not doing this for the developer. I'm doing this for the community to allow a use that could potentially have less traffic impact, because that's what I hear a lot about from my community is traffic. It's not that I'm doing this to help a developer who wants to build something in my ward. It just seems like it would better serve the community.
Okay, I'd like to bring up the zoning map real quick and follow it with the aerial and push something out there for the rest of you. Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me still and see the map. Can you hear me, Bill?
Yes.
Okay, so we're looking here at PM2 right here, right? And the dashed line, I believe, is the city limits. Am I correct, Sally, everyone?
Yes, that's correct.
So city limits, you have PM2, R1. This is Langton Green. This building structure, there's actually more here which are not depicted. I'll show you it on the aerial. So here's the PM2 we're talking about. Here's the city limits. And now I'm going to switch to the aerial. Here's again the PM2, city limits, Langton Green. So we have a scenario of, in my mind, the city limits meeting the county, and the county where seemingly you can build a lot more, a lot higher. What is the likelihood, or is there even a possibility, or am I way off base thinking that in the future they would want to build up and then combine and make an even bigger structure between the two, or am I really thinking out of the box here? Sally, anyone else comments on that?
Combine the two Bay Village facilities?
If you build here and try to go big and then maybe extend out. I mean, I'm not sure. Is there anything there worth noting or really not, since it's out of the city lines? I'm just trying to look and see what could be done if somebody would want to annex a property into the future and then make one massive facility. I don't see that being easy, but I see it being a possible route.
So someone would try to get annexed into the city?
Possibly.
Oh, okay. I don't really foresee any annexations really in the future. The city tried to, or was interested in annexing the parcel where the Lidl is going on the other side, and was not successful due to community opposition. So and in the comp plan, I wasn't even really going to propose any annexation areas other than cleaning up some of our borders we share with the county where there's property that's split between the city and county. So,
Okay.
you know, that's something that has to be in a comp plan. It's something the property owners have to petition for. And even so, you still have to meet all of the requirements for the bulk regulations, the forest conservation, lot coverage, setbacks, you know, so
Okay.
I don't see that as being very likely outcome.
Well, thank you for that. And this is over to anyone else who wants to make some input. But we already have some facilities for care down there, as was mentioned before. I believe you have here Hart Homes, I believe this is, and then Langton Green.
Mhm.
Those are both care facilities, correct? Or am I wrong?
I do not know.
Okay. And if they are, you have an impact of what those do, and people have been used to them being around there for a while. So how are those facilities impacting? What's their density already that they're using? Maybe we could use that as some comparison data to maybe alleviate the fears or make fear for maybe letting this PM2 go through or not. So just something for us to look into in the next 2 weeks. I'll try to get some data on that. If anyone else wants to, please go ahead. Is there anything else you want? And also the road, you mentioned a road addition extension, Mr. Savage, from the developer. Where would that exactly be? Or a road improvement?
Yes, so if you look where your mouse kind of at this CVS there, that road that you're on would turn down to the left on that tan area. Yes, it would connect that road, and then also if you go
So it connects
behind
here.
other way to your west, yeah,
Okay.
that way. So that's the existing lot, existing Bay Village Drive, and that would continue. Actually, that goes the full extent of the property currently, but the Lidl would have that adjacent lot right where your cursor is, where it's green right now. I think adjacent 2 lots would become the Lidl facility, and so it would continue all the way over to the Georgetown Road there.
So it would continue all the way over to roughly here, Georgetown, and come out. So we'd have a connection. There's already a stoplight here. There's a stoplight here.
Right, and that was part of the push for Lidl, was to say, well, hey, if you don't make this road connection, you're going to be having people who are leaving from the existing Bay Village assisted living, who are going to be driving up and making, well, I guess they won't be driving too much because they're in assisted living, but it just makes for a better traffic pattern, I think, to have that connector.
It
Also,
makes,
in
it
assisted
makes a
living,
very
these
small,
people-
it makes a very small attempt at a grid of streets. It's a first start, but a first start is really good in this case.
And with the assisted living here, there's not expected to be much driving by the residents at all. Or is there, are they expected to have cars and drive occasionally?
I'm not sure, Dr. Nash, do you recall? I don't recall the assumptions off the top of my head, but I think
When
that's
I read the
generally.
packet, it seemed like it would be people who could take care of themselves and drive out.
Yeah, I think for independent living, it said there's going to be 100 parking spaces, if I recall.
I believe that's what I saw.
For the independent facility, yeah, yes, I believe that's what it is. And yes.
Well, some of those parking spaces are for people who work there. At any rate, but it's for, in terms of the text amendment, which is what we're looking at, it seems to be clear that institutions for the care of the aged generate, first, a lot less traffic, and secondly, the traffic that they generate is not rush hour traffic.
Spaced
So
out.
that is something to be considered in potential uses for a zone such as this. That I think is a relevant consideration to our vote. Not what this facility will create, but what any senior facility creates in general.
Or the comparison, what you're saying is the comparison to what already could be put there zoning wise. This would generate a lot less traffic if traffic is a concern of people because it's spread out.
Yes.
Totally-
Now,
totally
now
agree
the
with you.
comparison in the testimony that I read, the comparison was with a large restaurant. But I think we also ought to consider, what an office building creates comparison. Because that's what's permitted there now. Somebody wanted to put up a 3-story office building, 100 parking spaces at least, and a rush hour traffic pattern. I don't know the numbers, but that's what we're looking at.
And office buildings are not in fashion, but the period for needing care facilities for the aged is here.
Yes. Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Let me ask, what I'm looking at is something that says optical center inside something, CVS. Up to the west of that is a white topped building. What's that? Is that Quantum Sales?
Yes.
Okay. Where's the tree?
It's directly to the west of Quantum Sales, close to the road. It kind of looks like a green blob,
Oh, there
but
it is.
yes,
Okay.
right there.
All right, great. Okay, I got you. And I see a footpath already there. There's a
Yeah, that may be
footpath.
the silt fence that went around.
Oh. Okay. All right.
Because again, most of that was cleared, except they had to protect that tree.
Okay.
About, I don't know, it was 6-7 years ago or more, probably more.
Great. Okay. I have no further questions of the alderman.
Okay, anyone else have any comments or questions at the moment?
So just to be clear, there are only 2 PM2 zones in the city. So this would only affect those 2, and this ordinance would only affect those 2, right? There aren't any other ones that it would affect.
Correct.
Okay.
However, David, Mr. If it's merged with the other quote transitional areas, then it would merge and you might see senior facilities and several of the others. But they all have the same, according to Dr. Nash, they all have the same transitional requirements. So.
And
Yeah.
and that's, a couple of years away, probably. I'm just throwing out the idea there for you.
So you're not proposing merging it as part of this
No,
Ordinance.
I would propose to do it after the comprehensive plan.
So we're just looking at these 2 properties only.
Correct.
It would only be 2 affected by this. Okay.
To be
So
fair,
just-
we haven't really looked up the road at the other possible facility site. So I will go ahead and move us up there real quick and
While you're doing that, I'll just make one general comment, and
please.
everybody has heard me make this kind of comment before, but I'm all for less restrictive uses, because I think the more restrictive uses we have and the more zoning classifications we have, the less resilient the city is to changes in the economy, things that are in favor, personal taste, all of the above. And if something has a very restrictive use, it may sit for years because there's nothing profitable that can be done with that use. So especially in this case where the use is deemed by a community that is really on top of things like this, deemed to be less impactful, I just don't see what the issue is.
The issue is we have to speak for the people in the public, and you say that now, but there's also try to say that to the people in West Annapolis, the village of West Annapolis, and say, hey, let's be really open about what we can put in. So we
I
have to
have-
we have to
I
look
have,
at
Mr.
everything.
Mr. Abrams, I have said that.
Yeah,
And I
and
say
we've
that all
had
the
people
time.
come, and we've had people come to our planning commission meetings saying, this is a village, it does not conform, we're not part of the city, blah, blah, blah. So we're just looking at we're just looking at everything and just trying to be thorough, that's all.
And I would add that I like having more flexibility in use, in the uses. I just have the same concern, I guess, that Bill was voicing earlier, or we don't want to get kind of blindsided, and it sounds like we won't be, because we will be reviewing this from start to finish, and we're not, by approving a use change, approving the project. So as long as we're all satisfied that that's not the case, you know, I think you've answered a lot of my questions, so thanks.
Yes.
And since we're on that subject, Sally versus Alderman Savage, we have a couple of uses that are permitted in the zone right now. But I believe, Mr. Savage, you said that some of those uses just weren't panning out because it wasn't going to work for the property. So we have a stagnant property for development. Am I correct, Mr. Savage, unless we allowed something like this?
That's my understanding based on what I've heard from the property owner, but I don't know if Dr. Nash has any additional information on that.
Not really. I mean, there are a variety of retail uses allowed there, but I think that this was what was most viable for the time.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was valid or not, but I know in the past I've heard the owners blame it on the tree, that nobody wanted to put a restaurant with a big tree in front of it blocking it. So yeah, I don't know if that had any validity or it was just an excuse, but who knows?
The new one there, that's a good one. But
Okay,
they said it.
all right.
Any other comments at this moment? And remember, this public testimony will stay open, so we can come back and comment on these same items again next meeting, which should be in about 2 weeks.
And Ben, what do you want to do with the comments you received? How do you want to introduce them into the record?
I was just about to say, I'd like to bring up and display, I could display them on my screen for input into the record. So if you guys don't mind, I will go ahead and do that, and we'll go one by one. You should recognize this one.
These written comments are on eTrackit, aren't they? Where people can go find them. And they
Yes.
yeah, they were, I mean, they were directly linked in the agenda. So I'm not sure you need to display them. They should be easily findable by the public.
Okay, well, we'll do exhibit, we will enter those into the record as exhibit A. Could we do a whole exhibit for all of those comments that are posted today, or should we do them individually? Because we could get quite a bit and end up going over, 20, 30 comments and entering them in. So
Mr. Sale, could I interject?
go ahead.
Put down, I did exhibit A as the staff memorandum. And then I did B as the McGregor support letter, I think. And then C is the John Arison support letter. And then D would be the Byron White quantum sales info. And then E is the Saber and Associates traffic study.
That sounds good to me. And that encompasses, I believe, all the ones that I saw, that you just saw. Does anybody else have anything that they maybe didn't see? And oh, by the way, if we happen to miss something, we can come back to the next meeting and read it.
Tam, did you say John Grant letter as well? Did you include that one?
I didn't see that one, but I can put that in as exhibit F. Was it sent out today?
No, a couple days ago.
Okay.
With the Arison and McGregor letter.
Oh, okay. I might have missed it. So you said John Grant support letter?
Yes.
And do you have a date on that? I'm sorry, I probably missed it.
Let's see.
You can give it to me later. You can send it to me.
Okay, I will do that.
Great, thank you. I'm done.
Okay, and again, any items, we'll double check from E-Track to what we just admitted, and then go over that. If we need to add anything else, we'll make note at the next meeting. In essence of moving the agenda along to the next public item for hearing. Are there any last minute comments on this one as it stands? Okay, thank you very much. We have entered, Ms. Tammy has entered those into evidence. And we'll move on to our O, TAC 10, TAC 20, written notification requirement for the purpose of increasing the distance for sending written notification to abutting property owners. And we will go ahead with a staff explanation if there is one.
Right. So this ordinance was introduced by Alderman Gay. Is he joined the meeting? I don't see him.
Can we check the waiting room, please? Or Mr. Savage, you have something to say?
Yeah, just, I don't know if he's on this or not, but I'm one of the co-sponsors, so I thought I'd stay on for this as well.
Oh, okay, great. That's convenient. Okay.
Well, let's check the waiting room as well, and we'll admit him, but so hopefully he'll show. If not, Mr. Savage, you'll have it. Go ahead, Sally, sorry.
Okay, so, and first Alderman Gay wanted to change the notice requirements for all projects from 200 feet to 750. I was a little concerned about that and the impact on smaller projects like variances where, a homeowner has to figure out our notification system and how to figure out who's 200 feet from his property and how to notify them. And it creates a lot of headaches. And so Alderman Gay agreed to limit it to the bigger projects that have, attorneys and architects who know how to do a radius and GIS and pull the labels, and it's much easier for them. The current planning staff was curious about this ordinance and why 750 was picked over 500 or 1,000. And I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Alderman Savage does. But the intent obviously is to make more people aware of larger projects. And so depending on the neighborhood, it could drive up costs for postage. I did a few samples today, back of envelope kind of samples. And I think for a big project, it's not a big difference as far as cost for someone who's already investing a lot of money, whether the postage costs 10 times more than it did before. I don't think that's going to matter. It is an additional cost, but I don't think it's significant for larger projects. But I'm glad we aren't increasing it for homeowners. And in a moment of frustration, I proposed my regulatory trade-off, which was that we should take away notice requirements for smaller projects because it is very complicated to explain to homeowners. I'm not sure it's really the best way to get public participation. But I'm not really prepared to offer that as a serious amendment. My point was, in the future, if we do increase the number of regulations we have, I would like to at the same time, so if we get a new regulation, I would like to at the same time take an old regulation away. So we only have net new regulations and not an increase in the number of regulations that we have to enforce with the same level of staff, because our staff gets very frustrated with new legislation that we get criticized for not being able to enforce things. And part of the reason we can't enforce things is because we keep getting new regulations, and it's just hard to keep track of. So that's just my little soapbox moment for the day, but let me know if you have any questions about the ordinance.
So what language is changing?
For major projects, So site, major site design, plan developments, and let's see.
Can you
Repeat.
direct me to where in the proposed legislation this would be?
Page 2,
Yes.
starting on line 33, is the notification requirements for plan developments, subdivisions, and major site designs. Instead of a notification radius of 200 feet, they would now be required to have a notification requirement of 750 feet. So they would have to, instead of notifying this many people, they'd have to notify this many people.
So wait a
Oh,
minute.
wait, you have to look at my hands, Bob. Instead of notifying this many people, they'd have to notify this many people.
No, I understand. I'm trying to focus in on the small and large difference. The way I'm reading it now is that property owners located within 200 feet of any property boundary of the proposed development shall get notice. That's the way I'm reading this, except for the large ones, it's 750 feet.
Right.
So the way it's written is that the small application still has to notify everybody within 200 feet. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that the current standard?
Yes. Right now, everyone has to notify people within 200 feet.
Okay. Okay. And so that this is actually written correctly. It's written correctly in that it's only bumped up for the major developments.
Oh, correct. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
In a clarification on this, if say there's a neighborhood, you will use West Annapolis Community Association. Say there's a development that has to get some notification, but you're outside 200 feet, but it's in that community. It still requires that community association to be notified, right?
Yes, you do now have to notify community associations.
This does not change that.
This does not affect that at all.
Right, but I wanted to make sure that
Yeah.
was independent of the radius.
Correct.
I have another question. And this is probably directed to our two lawyers who are here. I'm hoping that we get one answer. Does the fact that a person receives notification grant that person standing later to appeal in court?
Yes.
So this will now give everybody for major development will give anybody who receives notice is automatically granted standing?
Yes, that's the purpose of the notice. The notice is so that their rights aren't infringed upon.
I have a quick question. Are you referring to in terms of an appeal or in terms of a case currently before whatever board is giving notice or whatever entity?
No. A case on appeal in court, standing doesn't really apply to us. Anybody can come in and say whatever they want. But in court, a person has to be affected by, sufficiently affected by something in order to have standing to bring the court case. And will this automatically grant to anybody within 750 feet and to a community association automatically a grant standing to them to appeal to court?
So I think you're asking a different question from the one that I understood previously.
Yeah.
The occurrence of standing is going to determine on a case-by-case basis, depending on the facts of the matter. I think I hear you asking a different question. I think you're asking if by increasing the sphere as Alderman Gay and Alderman Savage's the ordinance is suggesting, whether we have increased the ambit of potential of people with standing to sue us in court based on a decision here.
Yes, that's my question.
And I think that I cannot answer that question as quickly as I just did. If you were talking about standing to contest at the administrative level, I do believe yes, but I will have to do a more in-depth search to understand how this ordinance will affect standing for circuit court, and that's beyond my ability to do as I on my phone right now.
Okay.
What about the inverse of Bob's question? And that is, if you are within 750 feet, but yet you do not receive notice, does that then call into question the legitimacy of the outcome?
And that's so that's the purpose for this, for the notice requirement. The purpose of the notice requirement is so that property owners can understand when their rights may be potentially infringed. By increasing the ambit, you have increased the amount of people that the legislator feels are affected by the decision from I believe it's 200 feet to 750 feet.
That wasn't the question. The question is, it greatly magnifies or multiplies the problem of notification to go from 200 feet to 750 feet, which is already a very difficult process for developers or in the first place. But if you fail, if you miss somebody, then have you called into question the legitimacy of the entire planning process and approval process that follows from that?
That's a great question. I don't think I have a answer for you today, only because I will have to go back to research that. But the essence of notice is that everyone's entitled to procedural due process, and to the extent something gets built and they weren't notified, that's a constitutional issue.
So we are potentially making bigger problems for ourselves by expanding this zone. Alex can do the math for me, between a circle 200 feet with a 200-foot radius to a circle with 750 foot.
Area goes to the square radius.
Right. So it's a huge increase. And that just increases the potential for error that I'm worried about.
Sally, could you quickly interject and remind us of the other methods of notification of the property owner, like signs on the property or posts online? So if I'm a neighbor and let's say I'm 800 feet away, I wouldn't be affected by this. Well, how would I know that anything's being done at that property? Don't they have a requirement to post on the structure or a sign on the property itself?
Almost all applications have a public notice requirement. There's the mailing requirement. A lot of our applications have to pay for an ad in the paper. I don't think anyone sees those anymore. And the community association notification.
What about specifically posting on the property?
Right. You have to post a public notice or a notice of a public meeting sign on your property.
Okay, so this is one small part of overall notification, and we're changing it so somebody would then get a letter in the mail at 750 feet, vice 250 feet.
Right.
You currently posted on the property.
Right. Currently, everyone within 200 feet gets a letter in the mail.
Right.
We hope.
They may not get it, who knows where it goes, but the sign, that's where the backup of the sign on the property is. Now, in the essence of, let's say
the sign on the property doesn't inoculate you against the fact that you failed to provide legal notice.
Perhaps, yes, I could maybe agree with that. I'm not the lawyer, but and the fact if we have gridded streets, and if you have let's say a development on one street but not the other, somebody may never drive by the property to even see that sign. That's not on their route of travel. So it's quite possible that a property that abuts another one that's going to have this planned development, they won't see the sign. So if you increase to 750 feet, then you might get a letter. The other notification would be through possibly your neighborhood association. Is there anything more modern we're not thinking about other than letter, like an email if people register with the city or something like that?
Not a requirement. I mean, I think that would be a good idea if we can think of new, more effective ways to notify people. That helps so they can find out earlier than, when someone starts digging in the ground.
Okay, well, then this is all I have. So the posting on the property, although it seems like that might be a no-brainer for backup and somebody would obviously see it, when there's properties that somebody doesn't have a street that goes down that development property, you're never going to see that sign. So then notification through the mail, whether it's 250 or 750, is good. The merits of going 750 versus 500 versus 200, I still don't know. Any other questions for the staff at this time?
I have something. It may just be a niggle, so excuse me, but it seems to me that there's a drafting error. It seems to me that repeatedly uses the word abutting property owners. I looked up the legal definition of abutting, and it means you have to physically be touching the subject property. There's no other property in between. So you could argue quite reasonably that the number of property owners that have to be notified in either case, 200 or 750, is exactly the same, because there's only one small set of property owners who are in fact abutting property. And if you lack a common boundary, you're not abutting. So we may need to rethink that terminology.
No, you've actually raised a great point. This is Joel from the Office of Law. You've actually raised a great point, because we are confined to the plain meaning of words, and abutting means abutting. Abutting, for example, in our city code refers to abutting the owners of a sidewalk, for example, and their duties to us for the sidewalk which their property abuts. So it does seem that you are right.
It just seems to me that the whole thing is kind of happening.
750 radius or 200-foot requirement would potentially not change the essence of the section.
Maybe that needs to be an amendment to the legislation, although I suspect that probably occurs in other sections of the code, but because that's existing language, but we can, maybe when we can hear the Office of Law, they can tell us about addressing that in the future.
And to clear that up, is it only me hearing them, hearing Joel be choppy, or is it everyone else?
No, I can't hear him.
Everybody.
Okay, so it's common. Joel, it seems like you have some choppy communications and we're not hearing about even half or less than what you say.
I would like to make a motion at this point.
Well, Mr. Pline had his hand up, so maybe we
Oh,
can
I'm
get
sorry.
that before. Go ahead, Mr. Pline.
He's so dark, I can't see him.
Yes, sir. I need a little. I need
It's
a little.
turning lights on.
I have a porch light on here, but it's not very bright.
Very green.
And there's too much noise inside. That's why I haven't gone inside. But so the question I have is for the sponsors of the legislation as to what they would hope the outcome of this change is. I'm just sort of not, other than more people seeing it, what's in potentially learning about something that they might for some reason not have learned about. What's the ultimate outcome? And does this really affect that?
Yeah, I think so. The goal is to just increase public awareness of some of these larger development projects. I know, just speaking as an alderperson, we do hear a lot of concerns from the public about not being aware of certain things coming up, being proposed to be constructed. And so I think this does go a long way, because as was mentioned, the other two avenues are newspaper, which it's being less utilized. And I don't know how many people are as crazy as I to actually read those pages in the paper. But we also have the public, the notifications on site, the signs. But those signs are also difficult depending on where they're placed, what kind of roadway they're on. It's really hard to stop and really find out what they're about. I mean, I've kind of toyed with the idea in the past of trying to have some kind of quick code, maybe a letter number combination, really short, that people could look up, plug it in on the website somewhere, and automatically have this come up, so they don't have to read a 500 words on this in small print on a sign real quick.
A QR code would do that really well.
Yeah, or that too. So I think that brings back to the importance of this public notification by mail. And I do want to just take the opportunity to say that when I again tried to do this a couple of years back when we had other legislation that came out of a lawsuit. I think Hyatt had sued us about something. We had to redo some legislation, but regardless, we weren't able to do it at that time because it was restricted on what we could do. And so this, when I looked at that, my point is, when I looked at it back then, I noticed that some jurisdictions, and what comes to mind is Rockville, which has 500 feet, and again, ours is 200. And I know some of the concerns raised about mailing is that it costs money, right? And it's difficult to figure out, but I think the cost could be easily overcome by simply doing it manually. I mean, that's what, campaigns we often do is just drop them right at people's mailboxes. It's much easier to do. It doesn't cost you any money except for the time to actually distribute the flyers or the letters in this case. And so I don't think cost should necessarily hold it back. I know it's already in the code where planning and zoning. I believe, Dr. Nash, correct me if I'm wrong, but planning and zoning has a database of community associations, which I think was put in there so the developers can utilize to help them out with this. So
it's actually the mayor's office manages that list.
Oh, okay, right. That's right. So yeah, I think those are barriers that are able to be overcome. But again, to get to the question, I think it's certainly public awareness is the primary goal here.
Okay, and for clarifications from Sally, what you were saying earlier, in the actual documents that we have here for the change, it says for the purpose of plan developments, major subdivisions, and major site design. But I believe you said you wanted to make this not just for those items, but for the more broad-based, so we don't have to worry about different zoning and who's getting what. But to put the same requirement on very small projects of a residential property versus a planned development or major subdivision, I still find it useful in my mind to separate those and not have it be so cumbersome for the smaller type properties like residential. Am I right in saying that you actually wanted to make it all encompassing?
No.
Me?
Yes.
No, I wanted it to be the way it is as proposed.
Okay, so just for the planned developments, major subdivisions, and major site design.
Correct.
So we're talking big projects, which this may increase the amount of notification burden, but that should be small potatoes in regards to the size of these types of projects, right?
Right, and also they are usually handled by people who do these a lot and know how the process works, how to get the notification pulled out, and it's much easier for them than the individual homeowner.
Right. So this is not as big of a burdensome thing to do. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Walden.
Mr. Savage, how did you arrive at the number 750?
That was not arrived at by me. I jumped onto this legislation. It was actually Alderman Gay's idea, which I supported. And but I think it sounds like from Dr. Nash, that was a bit of a compromise where originally he was going for 1,000 feet and went down to 750. But again, even looking at the 750, it's not even a quarter of a mile. It's nowhere near even quarter of a mile. It's like 0.14. So it's really not a huge area.
Okay, that's an interesting observation. It's even less than the distance that we have to include in traffic impacts. For whatever it's worth, in my community association, in terms of cost, it's easy to get, all the realtors have these databases with every street address, and you can just choose which street and where, and then have a bulk mailer send these things out. Or as somebody pointed out, you can just hire people to go door to door. But we could do 730 homes for about $350. So that's not the issue. If I could, unless there's other discussion, I would consider making a motion at this stage, but that we ask the Office of Law to answer 3 questions. The first one is to advise us as to whether the word abutting should be perhaps changed to something like neighboring, to get us out of the conundrum that Mr. Harold pointed out, a niggle which is perhaps more than just a niggle. The second question would be that he answered the question as to whether standing is affected by the fact of being notified. And the third question is also for Mr. Harold, is standing affected, or is the legitimacy of an approval or rejection affected by the fact that some people are not notified within the 750 feet circle? So I think that we need to get, if I stated these, is there any?
Could you state number 1 and number 3 over again, please?
Well, number 1 is whether the word abutting should be
Means
changed to-
abutting.
Well, no, it should be changed to something like neighboring.
Yes, right.
Okay.
To what word?
Something like neighboring, notice to neighboring property owners. Follow me? Because what we're talking about are people whose properties don't abut the application.
Correct.
They are neighbors to the application within 750 feet. So that's the first thing. Would he advise that change, additional amendment to the ordinance? The second question is, how does notification affect the people who affect standing? And the third question is, how does the failure to notify somebody affect the legitimacy of the approval or denial? Or standing, I guess. I'd even add that. And I think we need to get answers to those questions, and perhaps next time when we address this again, we'll have those answers. And
Agreed, given the public hearing is going to remain open, I think it's
yes,
very appropriate to wait for answers to those very pertinent questions.
all right, so that's a motion, if that's acceptable.
I would second it.
Is there any comments on that motion? All those in favor of that motion for action, say aye.
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 All those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the action item is passed for the Office of Law to get us answers on those 3 questions. Number 1 being the abutting. Number 2, the standing affected by being notified. Number 3, how does the failure of notification
Affect the process.
affect the process? Okay,
Joel, did you hear those?
Well,
Mr. Waldman, can you draft those up in summary and email those to Mr. Braithwaite as an action and copy the rest of the commission?
Yes, more homework. Yes, yes.
That's a
yes,
very
Mr.
simple, that's a
Chairman.
very simple one. Or you could send the actions to me and I'll make it look nice and forward it on. Would that make it
No,
easier?
I'll send it to everybody.
Because you can do it right now.
Ben, I'm not sure you opened the public hearing. I don't remember.
We kept the public, the
Did you
public
open-
hearing, and
Okay.
I wanted to talk about that, but we're not to the public hearing exactly yet. We're still
Oh,
talking
okay.
to staff.
Sorry. Sorry.
So. All right, so any more questions of staff? Okay, on the public hearing, I have received no documents from the public via email, and double check the eTracket website just now and also find no additional documents. Tammy, do you show the same? And Sally, do you concur?
Correct. We didn't receive anything.
Okay, and I just checked again to make sure we didn't receive any as of now, so that's good. So there's nothing to enter into the documents for
Except for the staff report.
Go ahead.
The staff report will be
Okay,
exhibited.
Exhibit A then for this item.
Hey, Ben, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Who is Benjamin Henry? Is he testifying on this?
No.
I'm technically counsel to the commission.
Oh, okay. I got on the call around 7:03. But I think, don't we have Joel?
Joel,
Go ahead, Benjamin, go ahead.
I would say Joel technically represents the city, and since the commission's needs its own separate, he is speaking on behalf of the city. There's a need necessarily to have two separate attorneys, one for the commission itself, then one for the staff and the city itself.
That's wonderful. Great idea. This is sort of new. When was this approved, or how long has this been happening? I thought we just had in the past one attorney, and it was for a long time Gary Elson.
This was started about then. Mehdi Smith was originally supposed to be doing this, and as Mr. Lyles took over, there was some discussion on this, and eventually Mehdi got sick, and I'm her partner, and I'm also under contract with the city, so that's when I started to take over.
So you're not city staff? You are
I'm a contract attorney. I represent a Board of Appeals, HPC, and this committee.
And if it helps at all, when we want an attorney for our meetings, we're going to have to request him. If you see Joel at the meeting, he's representing the city, and he may answer questions that we may have, but he is representing the city before he would represent us. But Benjamin is on request for our meetings and will not show unless we request him prior to meetings. So that's for everyone to know.
Thanks very much. I didn't know. I'm 3 minutes late. You miss a lot. Sorry.
No worries. And to be correct on our action item, since we're asking a definition of process from the city, I believe the action should go to Joel and not Benjamin. Is that correct, Sally? Or Joel or Benjamin?
I'll address it to both Mr. Brathwaite and Mr. Henry and let them decide who should answer it.
There we go. Okay. There is no public, as we said, there was no public item submitted. So we'll leave the public comment section open until the next session. And we will also have additional presentation by the city requested by this action item. So moving on, any other questions for this item at the moment by the commissioners or anyone else?
Just want to say thank you to the commissioners. I'm going to sign off now. Thank you.
Mr. Savage, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on to item number 3, the annual, and of course, we're closing the public comment for that item. Now we're moving on to the annual section 1 TAC 207-208 report to the Maryland Department of Planning. Report on how many residential permits, commercial buildings, subdivisions that the city has approved.
Excuse me, Ben, aren't you leaving the public comment on that ordinance open to the next meeting?
Yes.
You're absolutely correct.
Right.
So I should state, and I stated that, but then my mind got into moving down the agenda. So that, okay, yes, these items will open and then stay open. Thank you for that, Jackie. So correction, the public comment is still open through the next meeting on.
And people can submit testimony through the Civic Plus system or by emailing the department, and we will forward any additional comments we receive on either piece of legislation to the board.
And that's another good input because you know what, as for process, we will make that statement after each public item at the beginning and the end of it because we don't know when people are actually showing up to this meeting. So it'll be
Excellent idea, Ben.
All right, good job, Jackie. Thank you. Also, there's some lightning outside, there's some storms approaching. So if you have anything, car windows open or anything, anybody might want to check it. Moving on to 207-208 report to the Maryland Department of Planning. Report on how many residential permits, commercial buildings, subdivisions, cities approved in 2019. Staff, go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, Eric Borchers is going to present this. I don't see him. Mark, is he in the waiting room by any chance?
Nope, I don't have anyone in the waiting room.
Okay. I don't know where he is. I will present this then. So this is our annual comprehensive plan report we do. And I felt that it was more meaningful this year being able to find the state's report where they took all of the jurisdictions information and combined them into their state report. I thought that was a much more interesting document than my document, but I guess this is my small part of their interesting document. So this is the analysis we do every year. We look at if there's been any zoning text or map amendments, if there's been any amendments to the comprehensive plan, look at the number of building permits we've issued for new dwelling units and the number of building permits we've issued for commercial uses. And we look at whether any of our APF requirements have caused a development to not be able to go forward or to be stalled for a certain period of time. And so this year we approved a total of 63 new dwelling units. And of course, all of our developments are in the priority funding area because the whole city is a priority funding area. I thought that was an interesting part of the state's report as well, looking to see how much development occurs outside of priority funding areas. And not very much commercial growth as you would expect, about 16,000 square feet. You'll hear more about the demand for commercial uses in July when our economic consultants are going to come back and for the comp plan and present some information about the fiscal analysis, fiscal impact analysis they've been working on. We did not have any projects that were stalled because of APF this year. I noticed in the state report, the jurisdictions that reported that they had developments that were paused because of APFs, it was mostly for schools. We've come close to having to pause a project for a school, but once Monarch Academy opened, that opened up some of our elementary schools that have been closed. And I noticed that some of the jurisdictions also report situations where mitigation is required for APF. I haven't been reporting that. I didn't realize that that's what they were looking for. That's not how the question reads to me, because we often have situations where developers have to do mitigation to address the APF issues. I mean, a lot of traffic mitigation. We have people who've had to provide new pumping stations to meet their sewer. APF, things like that is pretty standard for development proposals. So,
Sally?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that was the only striking thing that really jumped out at me from the report was that our APFO hasn't triggered any development restriction in the last 3 years. It's a statement that suggests that our number one restriction isn't restricting anybody. But what you just said is actually more interesting, and that is that people are mitigating to avoid crossing the line, and mitigating to avoid being found in violation. So that answers my question. That it seems that's a significant kind of coda to what you stated there. That a lot of people have paid attention to that and have worked hard to avoid it.
Well, and I have a quick question about the fact that, you had to report on if there's been any developments that have been stalled for the APFO. And Eastport Shopping Center, as you know, was sent back on several violations of the APFO, and it has been stalled, and they're working on mitigation, is my understanding. So wouldn't we want to report on that?
Well, I thought that the state was asking for things where, like for schools, if you have a school district that's closed, you can do mitigation like build a new classroom, but most developers don't have a big enough project where they can go build a classroom. So a lot of developers would have to wait for 6 years if they wanted to develop in a area where the school was closed in the city. So that's always kind of what I thought the state was asking for. And we haven't had any of those yet. We've come close, but we haven't had any where someone had to wait the 6 year period till that you have to wait 6 years if the facility isn't adequate, on the theory that the city or the jurisdiction should be able to fix the facility in that amount of time.
Yeah, or you just say that it's workforce housing and that it is exempt somehow. So there's different ways to get around the APFO for sure. But I was wondering specifically.
Usually what people do, if the facility is inadequate in some way, they have to address that inadequacy, and that is usually determined by the director of the department. So like Park and Recs, if there's not enough parks near a development, then they have to either build a park or they have to pay a fee in lieu, which is in the city fee structure. It says, well, for this many acres, you have to pay this much money. So a lot of developers end up having to pay money for Park and Recs to meet that requirement. So I wouldn't have necessarily thought to include that in my report to the state, because it's happens in almost every project. In almost every one of our bigger projects, they have to do some kind of mitigation for one of the adequate public facilities requirements. So I don't know, I'll have to get clarification from the state if that's the kind of information they want, or if what I was thinking it is that they want. But I'd never seen a report like that from the state where they combined all of the jurisdictional data. So I thought that was very interesting.
So back to Diane's question. Eastport Lofts has been technically postponed? It hasn't been denied, has it?
Right. So as you probably all know, that our certification of that project, that it had adequate public facilities, even though we were requiring some mitigation, that decision was appealed to the Board of Appeals. They found that 5 of our determinations were deficient. So we've sent those back to the department directors from the relevant departments. They reviewed them. I also worked carefully with the Office of Law. We completely redid our webpage for adequate public facilities. We revamped, or we didn't revamp anything, but we made sure that it was very clear what the standards were that are required in code. And we made it very clear what the standards that the reviewers use, like in Public Works, they rely on such and such a standard when they're reviewing these water and sewer requirements. We made sure that was all explicit on the web page and in our review as well, because like some of the reviews we had for Eastport Shopping Center, it was like one sentence from a director saying that this meets adequate public facilities requirements. And, the board found that was, very perfunctory and not adequate to address the APF chapter. So now we have all of our department directors do a new form that Joelle developed. It's very comprehensive. We put it together in a cover memo. Oh, I got distracted by talking about how we generally change the process, but specifically, so we did that. Eastport Shopping Center was the first one that we did. We had the directors look again at the ones the board had issues with, address those issues. And I just sent out this week a new cover staff report and a new mitigation plan that they've agreed to in order to address the facilities that were inadequate.
So in answer to Diane's question, the project was never denied. It was simply continued. And there's been no final judgment from the Board of Appeals of denial or approval. It was a temporary.
No, they remanded.
They remanded to.
So it wasn't the final judgment. So you see the difference?
No, I get it. So I'm sure we've done things like hired police and, built some parks and stuff, but I haven't seen any of that. So I'm just, is all news. It's probably not relevant for this discussion, but
it's a good question because it's a good question because frankly, it appeared that the project was delayed, but it really was, but for purposes of this report, it wasn't put on a 6-year wait process. It wasn't denied.
Yeah.
Which is how I was understanding what the state was asking for.
Yeah, and I knew you used the word stalled, so I thought maybe that was in the state requirement, because this clearly would fit into the stalled category in my mind, but it doesn't
Yeah.
matter to me.
Yeah, really. What difference? Okay.
And this is for 2019, which, well, I guess that project started in 2019, so I guess
And the remand was in 2019.
that's true. That's true. It did. The appeal, I believe, started in 2019, I think. I don't know. It lasted a long time.
Sally, it's just kind of an academic question, but I think that mitigation is the secret sauce of this whole recipe. And it would be kind of interesting to explore that and understand to what level mitigation is, how excessive or how significant it is or how insignificant it is, because I think that's the kind of the fine tuning dial that you've got your hand on there. It interests me to see how you can use it.
That's been the challenging part. And I think we might need some code changes going forward. We're looking at 22, like the park and recs fee, for example, I think is too low. I don't know, how that got set, and it should increase each year with cost of living or something, but it's a pretty low fee. But I don't have the ability to make them pay more than that fee, because that fee is clearly in the city code. So there is some areas where I think there should be code changes, but you will see the new format for the APF, the June 24th, I think you're getting a project called 106, 108 Annapolis Street. You will see the new review forms from the department directors and the new mitigation plan that the developer and the department directors have to sign and agree on.
How could there be a mitigation plan for something that hasn't been heard yet? 106, 108 Annapolis Street.
The department director approves the APF.
So it's done before it gets to us.
Right.
Which is not to say that we cannot review that. I mean, we can ask questions, you know what I mean? I'm not quite sure of what powers we have to override a department chairman, but it's certainly part of, I think, of what we can ask about.
Well, and when you are looking at the site design, there's a lot of overlap between what is required for APF and what is required for site design. So I think you'll have enough room under your site design purview to be able to, if there's something else that you think is missing.
Okay. Great.
Any other questions for Sally on the report? It does sound like we have an action to get more information, or at least a study project for us all to get some more information on the Attica Public Facilities new rollout. I was kind of unaware of all the changes. I knew they were doing something, but I didn't know they were completed. So,
and Sally, does it come before us for a vote? Do we take a look at it? How does that work?
Does what come before you?
So there's new mitigation rules, it sounds like, that have been established.
Nothing really new. It's just been formalized so the standards that are currently in the code, we make sure those are all specifically addressed. And then the standards that people use to review applications, we make sure those are on the website. So the public can recreate how we review a project for APF. I would like to make code changes, and I would like to talk to you all have a discussion with you all about that for Title 22. And so that would be something you would, give input in and vote on ultimately when it becomes an ordinance.
After we vote on this report, I have some suggestions specifically on that and a few other potential work sessions. So if there,
I do have on July June 11th, I've asked Jackie Guile to give a presentation to you and the nitty gritty committee. And then, so that's June 11th. And then July 9th is the fiscal impact analysis presentation. So for your calendars.
I'm going to suggest two more, but I'll wait.
This report is supposed to have a public hearing. We did not receive any public comments on it.
You're beating me to the punch there. And we don't also have an e-track link for this one. So obviously,
There should be a link to the plan on, is there a link to the?
There's a link to the plan, but wouldn't we put the documents in e-track with it? Where would we put comments for it? The same as the others, I would presume.
Oh, well, that's a good point. So it's
But
not.
since we don't have any comments, we're okay.
Right. I didn't think of that then, but yeah, we didn't get any public comments, so.
Okay, so we're opening up public comment now for the Maryland Department of Planning annual report that the Planning Commission sends up. We have no comments emailed to us, nor do we have an e-track it where we would have any, because we haven't received any. But the public comment session will be open and remain open until our next meeting. And now in public comment, are there any last minute comments or requests for action by the commissioners, anybody on staff? Okay.
Given that this has now been continued to our next scheduled meeting, is that what's happened, Mr. Sale?
That's appropriate, Mr. Walden.
All right. I have, in addition to the economic and environmental presentations, I have the request, I'd like to request 2 more work sessions at this point. One of them, I think that it would be useful to get kind of a status update on the state of the bicycle plan. Maybe from Mr. Callahan from the mayor's office could give us 20 to 30 minutes and just where does it stand? What kinds of things are they thinking of? Because I think that the bicycle plan will become a part of the comp plan. And I just think that a kind of a work session status report would be useful. Nothing major, but useful.
Okay.
Second thing I think that on a more significant topic is, I agree with you. I really think that we need to look at APF. And I don't know much about it. I really would like to get educated on it and see where we go with it. I mean, it may once again become a part of the comp plan. It may become a part of legislation prior to the comp plan. I don't know but if you could arrange that, I think it could be really useful. You may invite the committee on that as well. That's up to you.
Okay, great idea.
Thank you.
So Sally, can we just, I have 2 things. So Ben, you announced that a date definite when the hearings were continued to.
That's our next planning commission meeting, which should be our Wednesday meeting of the month, which should be in about 2 weeks.
It's June 24th. Yeah, you need to announce that it's continued to June 24th. You have to, part of this process is to announce a definite date it's continued to. I'm just.
Okay.
And then the second thing is that at this point in time, I sent you a draft agenda, I think yesterday. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it for June 24th, but we have two public hearings scheduled for June. In addition to the continuation of the 2 hearings from tonight, there is a public hearing on a site design plan for 106, 108 Annapolis Street. And there is the public hearing on the Newtown 20 plan development. And those are both scheduled for June 24th. And then they will have to be continued to the first meeting in July, which is July 7th. And we are tentatively, hopefully expecting to schedule the amendment to the Park Place plan development for July 7th. So just to give you an idea of what's kind of in the wind that's coming up in terms of hearings. You have a pretty full schedule for the next 2 meetings.
And you meant July 2nd, not July 7th.
Yes, I did mean July 2nd. I get my dates mixed up.
That's quite all right. And what Jackie, you made allusions to, and we all understand, is the log jamming of items, because it's almost like you hear them twice, so it's almost double the work. Thank God Chairman Waldman got those extra meetings for us, so we'll have to make them rapid, as we're doing right now. So thank you, Jackie. And June 24th is the continuance date for all of the public comment items that we had this evening. So again, what Mr. Waldman requested was 2 work sessions, one briefing on the bicycle plan. The mayor's office, Mr. Callahan, has sent me already some great information on portions of it. Maybe we can get him or Sally can work with him to do that. Also, adequate public facilities work session, we can add that in there.
Okay.
We will need to have a further discussion about when you would want to fit them into the schedule too. But we can have that when you have had some time to give it some thought.
Okay, thank you. And also, I'll make a little side comment with regards to X-Park Communications. Since we are continuing a lot of these public sessions to the next meeting, please take note that in the past, how we've had them just be closed out and we would talk about them afterwards outside of the meeting space. We're not going to be able to do that for X-Park communication reasons. So please keep that in mind. You've all had the training. Put that in your pipe and go with it. We also will probably be having some refresher X-Park communications at some point in this coming month, this month. So we'll also let you know when that is. And we probably will need a little administrative few minutes here or there meeting by the commission and staff to iron out agendas or future log jam of items, but not actually talking about anything that involves public comment or applications.
And also, Ben, I sent you a draft yesterday of a projects in the pipe, projects that are actually applications in the office, and also things that are not in the office yet as actual applications, but items that we have had, staff has had preliminary meetings with. And I wanted you to review that before we distributed it to the entire commission, just so everybody will be aware as you move into a phase where you're going to be actually making decisions on major site designs.
Right, and I believe this is a good time to introduce something I mentioned before in our previous meeting, is that we need to have a document sent out that refreshes us every month on items that are currently applications that are received by the Planning and Zoning Department. So we don't.
Yeah, that's what I sent. I did send you a draft yesterday of that.
Which is this. So
Right.
We're going to review this, put it out to everyone. So it's a quick refresher. You can just open it up on your computer. Hey, what's under application right now? So we don't fall into that pit of X-Park communications. Any other questions on the subject at the moment?
I have a comment and a question. I love the idea of having the work session on the bike plan. I wonder if we could have somebody from OPE or Department of Office of Environmental Policy give us an update on the Greenway plan and the master tree plan, because those would also be incorporated into the comp plan. So
Jackie's giving a presentation on June 11th. I can ask her to include that.
Oh, that would be great. And the other thing is, you mentioned that we're going to talk about the environmental analysis that's being done in July. And who did the city hire?
The fiscal analysis.
Fiscal analysis. So I'm not sure what the difference between a fiscal analysis and an economic analysis is.
Oh, I thought you said environmental.
No, fiscal and economic. So who I didn't realize. I thought Eric was working on that. Did we actually and then end up hiring a consultant to do the economic analysis or fiscal analysis?
Eric is working on the mapping of it. But no, we have BAE who did the housing analysis. They did the fiscal analysis as well.
But they're not, BAE isn't they don't do fiscals. I mean, as far as I know, they do
Yes.
that.
Exclusively what they do.
Oh my gosh. Okay, is it possible? We're just curious because some of us wanted Urban 3. Do you know how much BAE charges for the fiscal analysis?
I have a contract with them for work on the comprehensive plan. I don't feel comfortable revealing, discussing the details of that contract in a public forum.
No, I understand. It's just that the urban 3 people are recommended by strong towns that have such great, well, they've got a really interesting way of looking at what fiscal analysis, economic analysis.
Yes, but they did not respond to my RFP.
Oh, because we were saying we have contacts between Alex and a few other people that we know there. So maybe
That's not really how it works, though. They have to respond to my RFP in order to fit in with our procurement law.
Right. So well, I guess it's too late now to look at an RFP because that would have been great.
I think you'll be happy with the work they've done. They did a very good job.
Okay, I happen to have the document real quick. We could go ahead. I can go ahead and share. That involves the list of projects, and it'll take a second since we do have a little bit of time left. So stand by. All right, hopefully you're seeing this. Dave Iams, are you seeing this? Thank you, Dave. Again, wonderful background, Dave. This list includes both projects that have already been submitted and those we anticipate to be submitted. You know, the ones that are anticipated to be submitted, Jackie, I find that we should separate those out document-wise because they have not been technically submitted. Is there any reason you think that would be involved? Is there any reason that you would know of for Export Communications or something that's not submitted yet? Or
Well, I think our purpose in putting this together was that, you know, so that you would be aware in case, in terms of the ex parte communication issue, if someone approached you about a project that we've been meeting with them on, or, you know, that you would be aware that they were planning to submit something to the office for approval, and that you might want to consider not discussing the project with them, even if it hadn't been formally submitted to the office. You know, we're trying to get a real handle on this whole ex parte communication issue, since it's a friendly town and lots of times people do get approached to talk about projects, and you know, we're trying to, and I think if Joel was still on the call, he would agree that it's inappropriate for board members, first of all, to talk to applicants about projects outside of the meeting format. And the Tuesday night at Board of Appeals, because we had a situation where someone had approached several people on the board to discuss applications that were before them, they had to recuse themselves from the deliberations on the item. And then the applicant doesn't really have the benefit of hearing from the whole board on a topic. And you know, that's, so at that point, it just.
I understand.
So that's why we had included those, but I would be happy to separate it into 2 groups.
Got it. And we have Benjamin Henry on the line, and he is our Planning Commission legal representation. Benjamin, when it comes to this ex parte communications, would it be appropriate to have you attend with us and talk about this on a sidebar meeting for training, rehash, or would it be better for Joel?
So the Office of Law would be training all boards and commissions, specifically the Planning Commission and the Board of Appeals are within the purview, because again, we're given neutral information about serving the city of Annapolis as a commissioner on a particular board. So that'll be the Office of Law. That'll be within the Office of Law's ambit.
Okay, Joel, I appreciate that. So it would be you you're right, the Office of Law. You didn't necessarily say your Office of Law. Could we expect to get something with respect to that within this month of June? A 1-hour refresher?
Yes, we will circulate dates and times and for a training as such.
Okay, wonderful. So I'd like to postpone any more questions with regard to ex parte communications in this document to that time, unless anyone else as a commissioner thinks now is a better time.
And Ben, if anyone else on the commission having now seen this, has any other suggestions about the project list and or formatting or what else they'd like to see on it? I tried to keep it fairly brief so that it wasn't like super detailed, feeling that if you needed additional information, you would let us know. But this is something new we're doing, and we're happy to listen to anybody's suggestions related to it.
A simple one of making the textual color of something that is been submitted as an application red and something that has not yet been submitted be a different color.
Okay.
Maybe, that way, ones that are red, it's like, whoa, Those are ones
As long as I can pick the color.
generally red meaning, watch it,
Oh.
and yellow meaning something that's about to be red.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, and we'll expect to get a sidebar meeting for training from the Office of Law this month, sooner rather than later. And we can talk about the issues had and refresh ourselves. It'll be good to get into that. Any comments by the other commissioners with regard to that? Okay, any other items that the commissioners want to bring up administrative wise? All right, our next planned meeting is going to be June 24th for continuance of these public hearing items, plus additional items to be broached. In the interim, we would hope to have the work session training on XPAR communications, and also maybe one of those 3 work sessions that we've requested action on with the bicycle path, adequate public facilities, and also the June 11th already planned meeting where the Office of Environmental Policy question that Ms. Butler brought up would be addressed.
So Ben, I could also suggest one more thing. We are not having a Board of Appeals meeting on June 17th. So we have that as an open date. If we can work with the Office of Law on using that night for, because we could get a Zoom meeting that night.
Would our meeting necessarily have to be a public meeting if we're just getting training? I don't
know. It also could be a during the day thing.
I think we could do, okay, we'll talk about that on the side, and that's a good note, and we'll broach that in the meeting, in the emails chain going around the office.
Super.
Thank you, Jackie. Any other questions from the staff? Commissioners, any other comments? All right, well, I thank you all for your support. There will be no findings drafted for these items yet, but it would be nice to actually start findings for each one of those, so we have a rough draft already in process. So Sally, if you could send me a shell for each one of those items, and I can start populating some of the comments we've already had, if that makes sense. If that process seems to be too much work and a little bit too much, we can change in the future, but that's the first take that I have at it. Any other comments by commissioners for drafting and starting a meeting minutes early? Okay, wonderful. And David Iams, I love the change in your background again. Wow, man. Okay, well, that will conclude the public session, and we will adjourn the meeting. And thank you, everyone. We will please remove us from live YouTube. And if anyone wants to stay and chat for fun afterwards, the meeting window will still be open. So